Chapter 1. New York in the Spring. It was a fine but chilly spring morning. Fine enough even to make the New York borough of Queens seem attractive. Like any other day, I left my apartment on Main Street, Queens, and walked to the subway station to commute into Midtown Manhattan on the number 7 train. Like any other day, I read the New York Daily News to pass the time during the journey. Out of professional interest, I always glanced through the day's fresh crime stories. Muggings, thefts, a carjacking, a shooting, a bank robbery, and so on. Crime, the unpleasant reality of life from which I make my living. The name's Marley, Nat Marley, licensed private investigator. My prediction is that you already have a mental image of my type of work. I can safely bet that your image comes straight from the fantasy world of Hollywood. That's a long way from the truth. The majority of my work is dull, often just pure routine stuff, like divorce, bad debts, or missing persons. Don't imagine for a moment that I'm good-looking either. Just an ordinary-looking guy, bald, overweight, and on the wrong side of 40. And let's get another thing straight. My working days seldom start with a wealthy, attractive female client anxiously waiting for my professional services. My office is on East 43rd Street, just a couple of blocks from Grand Central Station. Stella Delgado, my personal assistant, was already at her desk talking on the phone. Stella's been with me most of the time I've been in business. A beautiful, intelligent Puerto Rican in her late 20s. If she wanted, she could get a far better job elsewhere, and I've told her that too. But she insists on working for me. She must like me. You've heard of the expression, on the wrong side of the tracks? Meaning the poor, underprivileged areas of the inner city? That's where Stella grew up, in the barrio on the Upper East Side, known as Spanish Harlem. She had left school early and got into plenty of trouble as a kid. Then it took years of night school study to catch up on her education. As she put down the phone, I asked, "How are things on this beautiful spring morning?" Silence. She just gave me a blank stare. The morning mail was on her desk, unopened. Something was definitely wrong. "Stella, what's the matter? Come on, out with it." She looked up at me tearfully. "Nat, I don't know what to do. It's family. My kid brother, Jose. I've just been talking to him on the phone. He's been arrested. He could be in serious trouble." There was work to catch up with that morning. Bills to send out to our satisfied or dissatisfied clients, and some annoying letters from the IRS, the tax people. Yet again, they'd claimed I hadn't paid enough tax. But clients and the IRS would have to wait. "Stella, tell me everything." "It's a long story. Jose was found by the police in the early hours of this morning on 112th Street, just off Lexington Avenue, Upper East Side. He was lying unconscious with head injuries in the driver's seat of a car that had crashed into a wall in a parking lot. Nat, he doesn't even own a car. Anyway, He was taken to the emergency room at Metropolitan Hospital. Now he's in a secure room under police guard. He was allowed to make one phone call, so he called me. So what's the story? How did he get into this mess? I asked. The awful thing is, he has no memory of what he was doing, Stella said. All he can remember is being at some bar in Brighton Beach with his buddies yesterday evening. Then, nothing. Has he been charged with anything? I asked. No. At least, not as far as I know, replied Stella. Why were Jose and his buddies going out for a drink at Brighton Beach anyway? That's quite away from Spanish Harlem for a night out. Jose works in the summer at a diner on Surf Avenue, Coney Island. The place closes up in the winter. Jose had been to see his boss to confirm his job for next summer. He got some good news. They took him on as a cook. Jose had taken a couple of his buddies along to see if he could fix up work for them. They were taken on as waiters. Good money, plus room and board, starting 1st of April. Afterwards, they went out to celebrate. The thought of Coney Island brought back some of those golden childhood memories. Trips to Coney Island Beach and the rides at the amusement park. Family vacations at the beach. I put those thoughts to the back of my mind and concentrated on Stella's story. Anything more? I asked. He said he had just a vague memory of a bar somewhere on Brighton Beach Avenue. He knew he'd had a few too many drinks. Then nothing until he woke up in a hospital bed. Maybe he's in shock, I suggested. Temporary memory loss. If this was a simple case of drunk driving, he wouldn't be under police guard. And where did he get the car from? I don't know, Nat. Jose's never had a driver's license. Not having a driver's license didn't mean he hadn't stolen the car and driven it anyway. But I didn't say that to Stella. I thought for a moment. If Jose hadn't been charged with any offense, the NYPD could only hold him for a limited time. All right, Stella, this is what we'll do. If Jose hasn't been formally charged, there's no reason why we shouldn't be allowed to visit. We're going straight over to the hospital to talk with him. Stella didn't move, but just stood by her desk, biting her lip. Is something else bothering you? I asked. Nat, I'm worried sick. Jose's an ordinary, lovable guy who likes a good time. Okay, he's got a criminal record. He got into some trouble when he was a teenager. But I know he's harmless, a danger to nobody. But someone with his background, you know as well as I do what conclusion the police will come to. Come on, Stella, I said. Things have changed in this city. It's not like the bad old days. You know how sensitive the police are nowadays about any question of possible prejudice. You can't assume that the NYPD will think Jose is guilty because of his background. Any suspect has to be judged on the evidence. Maybe you're right, she replied simply. Stella didn't seem to be convinced, but I knew the NYPD would go to any lengths to avoid the kind of publicity an accusation of racial prejudice would attract. I also understood Stella's fears. Stella and her family are Puerto Rican. During the 1950s, Tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans emigrated from their island to the USA. When they arrived, some of them discovered that the USA wasn't the land of opportunity they'd expected. Some had exchanged the poverty of Puerto Rico for the poor neighborhoods of New York. There were dead-end jobs waiting for them as kitchen hands or unskilled factory workers. Today, however, some have succeeded in creating a good life, like Stella, with a permanent job, comfortable apartment, and loving husband. But for Stella, it had been a struggle. I could appreciate how her culture and background might affect the way she saw things. "Lock up the office and let's go," I said. Chapter 2. Metropolitan Hospital. After a few inquiries at the main reception desk, we were finally given the location of Jose's room at the hospital. Eventually, when we reached the floor, it was obvious that gaining access would be no simple matter. There was a bored-looking police officer sitting outside. I thought I might start with a little gentle persuasion. It can sometimes work, even on police officers. I should know. I used to be an NYPD officer before I set up my own business. "Excuse me," I said, showing the officer my investigator's license. "I represent Mr. Jose de la Cruz. Would it be possible to speak to him? The lady here is Ms. Delgado, sister of Mr. de la Cruz." The officer was unimpressed. He looked me up and down and said flatly, "Sorry, sir, no one's allowed in. And that's official." I wondered if he was going to be one of those people who get their job satisfaction by creating difficulties for others. I wasn't going to take no as the final answer. "Come on now, just a quick word. Won't do any harm." "No," replied the officer sharply. "This guy's a suspect. He's wanted for questioning." "Suspected of doing what?" I demanded. "Has he been charged with any crime?" "Don't know and no." "Thanks for all your cooperation. Give me the name of your boss, will you?" I asked. It was Captain Oldenburg, a familiar name. Oldenburg and I had worked together at the NYPD. That was over 15 years ago, when we'd both been patrolmen on the streets of the Lower East Side. Since I had left the NYPD to become a private eye, Oldenburg had risen through the ranks and had now been promoted to captain. Every now and then our professional paths crossed. Oldenburg was the sort of guy you didn't forget in a hurry. He could be bad-tempered, loud, and dominating at times. Despite that, he was basically a good cop. I'd need all my charm to deal with him, though. "Thanks. I'll be back," I said. Stella was looking furious. "Nat! Exactly what is going on here?" she demanded as we walked away from the room. "Are you just going to take no for an answer?" "Stay calm, Stella. In this situation, we need friends, not enemies. I'll call Oldenburg." I phoned police headquarters and was put through to Oldenburg's office. He wasn't exactly pleased to hear from me. That was normal. He was even less pleased when I asked if Jose was free to leave once the doctors had given him the all clear. "You've got to be joking, Marley!" he shouted. There's no way I'm going to let that guy out on the streets. He's being held on reasonable suspicion. I've had a crime scene team examining the car Dela Cruz was found in, and I'm waiting for the results of forensic tests. Tests to examine what? Bloodstains on clothes? DNA? A weapon? I tried my charm on Oldenburg again. I'd be interested to know what those tests would be for, I said. Sure you would. Marley, you know I can't reveal any details of evidence until the suspect has been charged. It was the answer I'd been expecting. No harm in having another try. Have you established who was the owner of the vehicle? I asked hopefully. Same as my previous answer, he replied bluntly. I got the impression that the captain was enjoying himself. One last attempt to make some progress. Okay, Oldenburg, I know your position. Rules have to be obeyed. But if my client hasn't been charged, why can't I speak to him? I have his sister with me, and she's upset in a big way. Just 10 minutes, and I'll agree to the police officer being present too. All right, Molly, have your 10 minutes. I'll call the officer and tell him to expect you. We hurried back to speak to Jose. The officer showed us into his room. Jose was sitting up in bed, with a bandage around his head and an IV drip attached to his arm. There was a hopeless expression on his face. Stella went over to him, took his hand, and spoke to him gently. How are you feeling, Jose? Not great. I'm full of painkillers, but I can still feel my head spinning, said Jose. Stella, it's real good to see you. Are you going to get me out of here? I haven't done anything wrong. You and I both know you haven't done anything wrong, she said. Remember what I told you, Jose. You've got to keep holding on. So what's the cop doing here, huh? Asked Jose, glancing in the direction of the officer. We had to agree to the officer being present. Jose, this is my boss, Nat Marley. He's going to help you. I'm sure glad to see you, Nat, said Jose. If we're going to help you, you've got to give us the whole story. Don't hold anything back, I said. Everything that happened from the time you left home yesterday until you woke up in this hospital bed. Jose, with his two friends, Miguel and Carlos, took the subway to Coney Island to find work. The boss at the diner offered him a job as a cook, and Jose's buddies were taken on as waiters. Jose showed Miguel and Carlos around the sights of Coney Island during the afternoon. After stopping for food, they moved on to Brighton Beach to celebrate. By early evening, they'd had several drinks in bars on Brighton Beach Avenue, in the heart of the Russian community. He had a confused memory of waking up in a bar. His buddies had gone. Then, nothing. The next thing he remembered was waking up in Metropolitan Hospital. You don't remember anything else? I asked. Nothing. It's the honest truth, Nat, said Jose. It's all a black fog. Brighton Beach? Kind of an unusual night out for three guys from Upper Manhattan, huh? I asked. You're right. At first it felt kind of strange for us to be there, said Jose. But people were nice, and didn't mind three outsiders having a night out. One bartender got friendly when we asked him about all the different vodkas. Now, think hard, Jose. Can you remember anything else? I asked. Nothing, he replied. What happened to Miguel and Carlos? I can't remember. It didn't look good. Jose had been found unconscious at the wheel of a car that wasn't his. He had no memory of what had happened after passing out in a Brighton Beach bar. Jose, I know you don't have a driver's license, but can you drive? I asked. No way, Nat. I've never tried. And even if I could, I'd have been too drunk to drive. The police officer interrupted us. Time's up, Mr. Marley. There wasn't any point in asking for more time. I didn't think we were going to learn anything more of value. As to what had actually happened, it was still a complete mystery. Was Jose the victim, or was he the guilty party? My impression of him from our brief talk was of a harmless, ordinary guy. A guy who had gotten into some sort of trouble and had no explanation for what had happened. It wasn't looking good. There was some small hope, though, since I'd gotten clients out of worse situations than this. Jose needed a lawyer urgently, and I knew just the woman for the job, Lena Rosenthal. She was capable, intelligent, and tough. Someone who could stand up to Oldenburg. As soon as Jose was charged with a crime, then we would have something concrete from the NYPD. Otherwise, we were just operating in the dark. Stella had to get back to her family, so I gave her the rest of the day off. I just wished I could say something that might give her some comfort, but I knew whatever I said would be inadequate. Once I had more information, then I might be able to offer her some hope. The next day, the temperature was close to freezing. A layer of frost covered the windows of cars parked on the street overnight. I'd arrived at the office early and was just putting the breakfast coffee and donuts down on the desk when the phone rang. A familiar voice barked at me. Captain Oldenburg. Molly, just calling to tell you that your client, De La Cruz, is still being held at the hospital. I wanted to get him moved to headquarters for further questioning, but the doctors insisted he be kept under observation. I'm still waiting for the results of the tests on bloodstains found on his jacket and a wallet in his possession. Oldenburg had given away a few more details. Bloodstains? Things were getting more serious. In desperation, I said, Oldenburg, my client can't drive. And what's more, the alcohol level from the blood tests should indicate he'd have been incapable of driving anyway. Molly, don't make me laugh, he replied. My client needs to consult his lawyer. With your permission, I'd like to take her over to the hospital this morning. Any objections? Be my guest, Molly. I'll call the officer on duty and tell him to expect you. By now, Stella had arrived. I told her the latest developments. She took it all in silently, then sat in front of her computer with her head in her hands. I arranged to pick up Lena Rosenthal. Later, as our cab headed up First Avenue towards the hospital, I gave Lena all the details she needed about Jose's case. I also explained how I was involved. Lena, this isn't just a routine case for me. This guy's the kid brother of my assistant, Stella Delgado. Stella's been working for me so long that she's like part of my family. I feel responsible for both Stella and Jose. You could say it's personal this time. Lena nodded. Thanks for telling me, Nat. Anything else I should know? I should warn you about Captain Oldenburg. He has a reputation for being aggressive and insensitive. Oldenburg and I have met before. I know what to expect, replied Lena. At the hospital, before we saw Jose, a doctor took us aside. Excuse me, are you family? She asked. We represent Mr. Dela Cruz. The name's Nat Marley, private investigator, I replied, flashing my ID at the doctor. This is his lawyer, Ms. Rosenthal. We have permission from the NYPD to visit our client. Thank you. I'm Dr. Erickson. Mr. Dela Cruz has been under my care since he was admitted. His condition has been giving me cause for concern. In the accident, he received a heavy blow to the head. So far, his condition has been stable, but there have been some symptoms that worry me. He's complained about seeing double images, and he has twice lost consciousness, though very briefly. And also there's some memory loss. So I must warn you not to put Mr. Dela Cruz under any unnecessary stress. He's been through enough already, and with any further stress... Understood, Doctor. We'll take great care. Before seeing Jose, Lena turned to me. It would be a good idea not to mention anything about the forensic tests. This guy sounds scared enough already. I nodded my agreement. Eventually, we were allowed in to speak to Jose. He looked at us with dull eyes and raised a hand to acknowledge us. I could see the despair in his eyes. Lena went over exactly the same questions as I had asked before. There was nothing more that Jose could add. We had made no further progress. As we were leaving, Jose cried out hopelessly, Nat, for God's sake, get me out of here! I'm going out of my mind! Chapter 3. Jones Beach. Saturday morning was cold but bright. I was feeling fit and active. I started the day by following my Saturday routine, buying the Daily News and wandering down Main Street, Queens to Slim Pete's Diner. Breakfast there was always reliable, unhealthy, but very tasty. Maybe that explained Slim Pete's weight problem. Morning, Nat, said Slim Pete. Why so cheerful? Pete, I now realize that a healthy lifestyle is no solution to a midlife crisis, which means I'll have one of your breakfast specials and plenty of coffee. As I worked my way through breakfast, I looked through the Daily News. There was a story about a murder victim, a guy by the name of Alexei Romanov. Where had I heard the name Romanov before? That was it, the old Russian royal family. The body had been found late Friday afternoon, floating in Coney Island Creek. The victim had been shot in the head and had been dead for over 24 hours. There were some more details. Romanoff owned some kind of business on Brighton Beach. He was involved in a society that helped immigrants from Russia to settle and adapt to life in the USA. His tearful widow told reporters that she had no idea who could have done such a thing. He seemed to have been a well-liked and respected man who was active in the community. I hoped and prayed there was no connection with Jose. Another story caught my eye. The headline read, "Wreck on Jones Beach." Part of a lifeboat had been washed up on the shore. 2 bodies had been found nearby. No further details. I'd been brought up on Staten Island. As a kid, just taking the ferry across to Manhattan seemed like a big adventure. A day out on Coney Island was a real trip. But Jones Beach, on Long Island, felt like going abroad. Maybe there's something of that kid still left inside me. I still get a thrill when I get way out of the city and stand on the beach looking out at the Atlantic, watching the waves crashing. Why not escape from the city for the day? The ocean air would do me good. I was folding up the newspaper when Slim Pete came over to chat. "So, what's New York's smartest private eye doing? Putting more gangsters behind bars?" he asked. "Funny you should say that," I answered. "New York's criminal community can relax. I've just decided I'm going to spend a day at the beach." "Huh, a life of leisure. It's all right for some people." I took the bus from Main Street to Jamaica Station. You can connect there with the Long Island Railroad to Freeport. From there, I took a cab to Jones Beach, a long, narrow strip of land about 2 miles from the mainland. There was a real chill in the wind coming in off the ocean, enough to keep any crowds away so early in the year. In the height of the season, thousands of New Yorkers crowd into the area to claim their little piece of beach. But today, I could walk without tripping over beach towels or bumping into umbrellas. I strolled along the shore for about an hour, then returned. Unusually energetic for me, but I felt better afterwards. The air was clean and fresh. Then I stood for a while on the Atlantic side, watching the waves crash onto the beach. I knew why I had really come here. It was the reports of the bodies washed up on the beach. It was my day off, but I was still playing the investigator. That was why my marriage had broken up. My wife never saw much of me when I was with the NYPD. When I started out on my own as a private investigator, she saw even less of me. Then, one day, she walked out on me. She left a note which said that I just didn't give her enough attention, and she couldn't carry on like that. The sad truth was, she was right. If there's ever a second Mrs. Marley, she'll have to be one very tolerant lady to put up with me. I wandered over to a group of bars and restaurants, which would be packed with visitors in a few weeks. 1 or 2 were already open, while in others, work was going on in preparation for the coming season. Outside a bar, an old guy up on a ladder was painting. He looked down at me from his work. "You're out of luck if you want a drink, mister. We don't open till the 1st of April, he said. "Just wanted to talk, if it's not holding you up," I replied. "Go ahead and talk, mister. I'm just doing this as a favor for my son-in-law. He doesn't care how slowly I work." "I see Jones Beach has been in the news. Some story about a lifeboat found wrecked along the shore, and 2 bodies," I said. The old man came down from the ladder. A good sign. I had got his interest. He pointed west along the shore with a dripping paintbrush. "The wrecked lifeboat was found about a mile west along the beach. There's an old lady. When I say old, she's a good 10 years older than me. Well, she goes beachcombing regularly. Looking for shells and stuff. She found the wreck and the bodies." "Really? Must have been quite a shock for her," I said. "I don't know about that, mister. It made her day. Never seen her so excited." It was time to make my move. I showed him my investigator's license. "Gee, a real private eye!" exclaimed the old man. "I would have expected someone—" "Someone younger and better looking," I interrupted. "We come in all shapes and sizes. Look, I'm investigating this wreck for a client," I lied. "I'd like to talk to this lady. Who is she, and where can I find her?" "Her name's Edith Tilden. People call her Edie. She's English, but she's lived here for years. She looks kind of eccentric, but she's okay once you get talking. See that place over there?" The old man pointed toward a beat-up building with the sign "Ornella's Italian Clam House" above the entrance. "She'll probably be in there," he continued. "She claims Ornella's the only person on Jones Beach who can make a good cup of tea." Life's full of surprises. Since when did Italians make good tea? I entered the restaurant. It didn't look open for business. Most of the tables and chairs were piled up in a corner. Only a handful of tables were set. At one of the tables sat a little old lady dressed in bright yellow and purple. A plump, cheerful woman welcomed me. "Morning, mister. No hot food until April. Just snacks and hot and cold drinks," she said. I was looking for a sandwich and a cup of tea. "I've been told that you make the best tea in Jones Beach," I replied. The old woman at the table looked up and said, "You've come to the right place for tea." "Then make that 2 teas. One for the lady here." I went over to her table. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. "Not at all," she answered. "Take a seat." I noticed the way she spoke. Not the slightest American accent. "Thanks. You English?" I asked. "I'm probably as American as you are now. I've been in the USA for 50 years, but never lost the accent or the tea-drinking habit. The name's Edie. Edie Tilden." "Pleased to meet you. I'm Nat Marley." The sandwich and teas were brought over to the table. After small talk about the weather, it was time to get some information. I showed Edie my private investigator's license. Her eyes grew large and round, and her mouth dropped open. This old lady was deeply impressed. I wish I had that effect on people more often. I hear you found the wrecked lifeboat and 2 bodies on the beach. I'm investigating the wreck for a client. I lied again. Edie waved her teaspoon at me excitedly. Mr. Marley, I've been walking up and down this beach for years. I've found bits and pieces of boats, but never a body. 2 real dead bodies. What do you say to that? She asked. Must have been a terrible shock, I said. People don't look pretty after they've been in the sea. Can you describe them? I asked. Certainly. 2 young men, could be anywhere in their 20s. Medium height, thin. Both of them looked as if they needed a good meal. Short hair. They hadn't shaved for days. Cheap-looking clothes. One of them had a gold cross on a chain around his neck. I've never seen one like it before. Let me show you. She paused, took a clean paper napkin from the table, found a pencil in her pocket, and drew a picture of a cross with 2 horizontal bars, the top one a little shorter. Then, at the base of the cross, a short bar at a 45-degree angle. I didn't recognize it. Thanks. Mind if I keep this? I asked. Now, what can you remember about the boat? What I found was the rear half, probably from a boat big enough to fit 12 people in. It had seen better days, though. What do you mean? The wood was rotten with age. Some of it was so soft I could break off pieces with my bare hands. It looked like someone had been trying to repair it, but hadn't made a good job of it. The boat must have split in 2. Were there any identifying marks, like names or numbers? I asked. Some letters at the back. Maybe the boat's name, Edie answered. I couldn't make out a complete word, but it looked like a foreign language. And that's about all I can tell you. The Coast Guard took it away, so there's nothing to see now. Thanks. You've been very helpful. Here's my card. Where can I contact you if I need to speak to you again? She wrote a Freeport address and phone number on the paper. I left Edie and did some more beach walking. I felt relaxed and content when I finally got back to Queens that evening. But there was still the problem of Jose. Unless I turned up some new evidence soon, he could be facing a long prison sentence. The next day, I woke up early, but was feeling active. It must have been the effect of all that exercise the day before. There are various ways to spend your Sunday. Unfortunately, I had to go into the office to sort out some accounts. On the subway, I glanced through the Sunday edition of the Daily News. It didn't have anything to add to yesterday's stories. At the office on East 43rd Street, I was trying to make sense of the previous year's accounts when the phone rang. Who on earth wanted to speak to me at this time on a Sunday? I grabbed the phone. It was Oldenburg. Marley, trust you to be in the office on a Sunday. Just wanted to bring you up to date on your client. I immediately felt tense. Go on, I said. I'm on my way back from Metropolitan Hospital, said Oldenburg. De La Cruz has been charged with murder. Chapter 4. East Harlem. Oldenburg, I began, you've got a confused guy in a hospital bed with serious head injuries, and you add to the misery with a murder charge. Just doing my job, Marley, he replied. Following procedure. Who's the murder victim? I asked. A guy by the name of Alexei Romanoff, some businessman from Brighton Beach. The same guy I'd read about in the Daily News. Okay, Oldenburg, you'd better explain how you reached the conclusion that my client's a killer. Oldenburg went on to give me the details. The cause of death was a shot to the head from the pistol which was found in the car. Jose's fingerprints were on the handle and trigger. The results of the forensic tests proved that he was the attacker. Romanoff's blood was found on Jose's jacket. Also, the NYPD had positive identification of a wallet found in his possession. It belonged to Romanoff. The police had the murder weapon, the killer, and forensic evidence. As far as Oldenburg was concerned, the investigation was closed. I had serious doubts. All the evidence pointed toward Jose. But what was the motive? Okay, Oldenburg, have you established a motive? I asked. Maybe he saw the opportunity to get some easy money. A carjacking, I guess, he answered. Again, I wasn't convinced. Could a sleepy drunk possibly be capable of carjacking and murder? What do you mean, I guess? Where's the supporting evidence? Do you have witnesses? I asked. Who needs witnesses with the amount of evidence piled up against him? Oldenburg asked. No point in continuing the conversation. I'd learned enough. The significant point was the lack of witnesses. Oldenburg obviously thought that the forensic evidence was enough to prove Jose was guilty. Someone must have seen Jose and his buddies celebrating that night. I'd have to go to Brighton Beach to do some of my own investigating. Meanwhile, I needed to check on Jose. A call to the hospital confirmed that his condition was stable, but the doctors were still keeping him under observation. It seemed unlikely that he would be allowed to leave the hospital, but Jose was better off there than in a cell. Another call, this time to Stella. I brought her up to date on developments. I also needed to get a clearer picture of exactly what had happened on Wednesday night. I had to speak to one of Jose's buddies. Stella promised to set up a meeting with them as soon as possible. A few minutes later, Stella called back. Nat, I've set up a meeting with Carlos and Miguel. Can you get over here now? Yes? Good. We'll be at my mom's apartment, 1295 First Avenue, apartment 104, on the 10th floor. That's the East River housing, on First Avenue between 102nd and 105th Streets. We'll be expecting you. Call me on my cell phone if you have any problem finding it. There wouldn't be any problem. The area was Spanish Harlem, and I'd walked most of those streets when I was an NYPD patrolman My only hope was that his buddies would remember something that had slipped Jose's mind. Anything. I took an uptown local train from Grand Central to 103rd Street, then walked the 3 blocks across town to the East River Housing Project. In the space of those 7 subway stops, the city changes completely. In Spanish Harlem, there's not a skyscraper in sight. Only a few remaining traditional brownstone houses among the anonymous gray concrete blocks of the housing projects. I was shown into a comfortably furnished room overlooking the East River, with a view of Ward's Island at the southern tip of the Bronx. Jose's buddies were there, 2 ordinary-looking guys in their early 20s. Stella introduced us. "Nat, I'd like you to meet Miguel and Carlos. This is my boss, Nat. He's like family to me, and we're doing everything we can to help Jose. I want you to tell everything to Nat, just like you told it to me." "All of it? Again?" asked Carlos. "Yes, every bit. You might recall something that could help Jose," she said. Carlos began. Much of what they said confirmed what we already knew from Jose's story. The interview at the diner, the sightseeing tour of Coney Island, the bars on Brighton Beach Avenue. What I was really interested in was the final bar where Jose had fallen asleep. "We ended up in this bar that had every kind of vodka you could imagine," continued Carlos. "The bartender in there got friendly when we took an interest in the drinks. He was recommending what to try." "The name of the bar?" I asked. "Sorry, Nat, I don't remember," replied Carlos. So, some bar somewhere in Brighton Beach, selling lots of different vodkas. Could be one of many in New York's Little Odessa. Can you remember anything else about the bar? "The walls were covered with baseball stuff. Team photos, shirts, bats, that sort of thing. I remember asking the bartender, 'Hey, what's all this? Baseball in the middle of the Russian community?' Apparently the owner's a huge baseball fan." "Good," I said. "There can't be too many bars like that in Little Odessa." "How long did you stay?" "We tried all these different flavored vodkas. After an hour or so, I knew I'd had too much. My head was spinning. Jose had fallen asleep, and I knew we'd have to help him home. We needed to get sober for the subway ride, so Miguel and I went out to find some black coffee. We found a place that had coffee to go. Carlos waited outside the bar with the coffees, while I went inside to get Jose. But there was no sign of him. I asked the bartender, but he didn't know. We just thought he'd woken up and gone home." "Thanks. You've been a great help. Call Stella if you remember anything more," I said. Progress at last. I now had a starting point for my investigation. I had to find the bar that Jose and his friends had gone to. Now I had a lead. The baseball connection. Suddenly my cell phone rang. It was Captain Oldenburg. "Molly, it's your client, De La Cruz. The guy's gone crazy. He broke out of an operating room and somehow climbed up on the roof of the hospital. He's threatening to throw himself off. He might listen to you. Can you come right now?" and help talk some sense into him? Chapter 5. A Matter of Life or Death. Metropolitan Hospital is only 3 blocks downtown on First Avenue. Stella ran on ahead, and I hurried after her. I was completely out of breath when I arrived. Outside the main entrance was a collection of various NYPD vehicles and a fire department truck with a ladder. Barriers had been set up around the base of the building, with signs that read, "Police Line, Do Not Cross." High up on the top of the building, sitting on the edge of the roof, I could make out a figure. It was Jose. If he jumped, there was no way he'd survive. Among the police vehicles was a large blue van marked Tactical Response Unit. That's police language, which translated means a negotiation team. These are the people whose weapons are words, not guns. They will negotiate for hours or days to prevent a crime or a tragedy. I was relieved to see them here. Those guys are so calm compared to officers like Oldenburg. They wouldn't get impatient watching paint dry. If it takes 48 hours to prevent a potential death by talking to the guy, hour after hour, they'll do it. Persuasion, not force, is their philosophy. Oldenburg was waiting for us outside the entrance. Marley, he began, this is kind of embarrassing. I cut him off. Embarrassing? It's a disaster. How on earth did my client end up on the roof? I demanded. I thought you had him under 24-hour guard. What's been going on here? Is this another example of NYPD inefficiency? As we hurried through the hospital corridors, Oldenburg raised his hands in apology. I can't offer any excuses. Your client had been taken to an operating room. The police officer was told that De La Cruz was unconscious, so he decided to take an unofficial break outside. The medical team had to leave De La Cruz temporarily while they attended to a more urgent case. During that time, he must have regained consciousness, panicked, and gone up to the roof. An elevator took us up to the top floor. We were taken through a door marked No Entry. At the foot of the stairs to the roof, Dr. Erickson was waiting. She looked nervous and anxious. Mr. Marley and Miss Delgado, thank God you're here. My patient needs people he knows and trusts. You know he should be in the operating room. He was being prepared for surgery before escaping, wearing only a surgical gown. He's seriously ill. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but this is a matter of life or death. Thanks, Doctor. I understand your concern, I said. One more thing, Mr. Marley. There are some curious bruise marks on Mr. De La Cruz's neck, like someone had gripped him violently. He couldn't have received injuries like that in a car crash. The doctor put her fingers and thumb around her throat to demonstrate. I told Captain Oldenburg, but he didn't seem to take any notice. I don't like that man's attitude. Me neither, I replied. Thanks for telling me. It could be very important. We climbed the stairs to the roof. Outside, the wind was bitterly cold. A woman was sitting on a low wall a few yards away from Jose. Detective Valdez from the negotiation team. Jose was sitting on the wall, wrapped up in a blanket from the operating room, with one leg hanging over the edge. Stella and I cautiously made our way along the roof. I don't like heights, especially when the only protection from a fatal drop is a knee-high wall. We sat down beside her. "Mr. Marley and Ms. Delgado?" she said in a whisper with her face turned away from Jose. "I'm very relieved to see you here. The more people there are around that Jose knows and trusts, the more likely we are to talk him off the roof. Just keep your distance from him until he's ready to speak to you." Jose knows us as Nat and Stella. "Are there any other officers up here?" I asked. "No. I tried to get more in position, but Jose noticed them and started to panic. So I insisted on just one officer, and here I am," Valdez explained. In situations like this, you never know whether a suicide threat is a desperate call for help or if it's the real thing. It's a situation where nobody can take chances. The consequences could be disastrous. Detective Valdez continued with the routine that has saved countless lives in this city. The technique was to establish a relationship and gain trust. "Jose, you know who I am now. I just want to talk," she said. No response from Jose. He put the blanket over his head, so his face was hidden from view. "I just want to know if you're listening. Raise a hand if you're listening to me," she asked. Jose briefly raised his right hand. She continued in the same smooth, calm voice. "I've got some friends of yours here, Stella and Nat. They're worried about you. Do you want to speak to them?" Again, no response. Detective Valdez didn't give up. "Jose, just listen. You know these people. They're trying to help you." Valdez tried patiently again and again. At last, a reaction from Jose. He pulled the blanket off, swung his leg back from the edge, and stood up. All he was wearing underneath was a green surgical gown from the hospital operating room. The poor guy must have been freezing. "What can you do to help me?" shouted Jose. "I got a murder charge hanging over me. What do I have to live for? My head. I got this pain. It won't go away." "Speak to him, Nat," whispered Valdez. I stood up, trying not to look down at the drop below. "Jose, we've got new evidence. I can prove you didn't do it." That wasn't strictly true, but it might encourage him to come down from the roof. "Then how come they've charged me with murder? How come?" protested Jose. He threw the blanket over the edge. There was a sudden shock of panic below, until it became obvious that it was the blanket, rather than Jose, that was falling. Then he sat on the wall, with his head down. Again, he swung one leg over the edge. "What do you think?" I whispered to Valdez. "Not good, but not a disaster. I'd like Stella to talk to him now," she said. Stella's voice was cracking with emotion as she spoke. "Jose, listen to me. I know you didn't do it. You're not a killer. Something happened to you after you left that bar, and that's going to prove it. We'll get you off this murder charge. I promise. Silence. Stella appealed to him again. Jose responded at last. What do you have to promise with? Now there was a change in his behavior. Words were coming slowly, as if speech involved a major physical and mental effort. I don't know. I'm finished. My head. What's happening? Asked Stella. I think he's going to jump, Valdez whispered. But I don't want to frighten him with any sudden movements. Nat, get ready to grab him. But don't move until I say now. Jose's body began to tremble violently. He began to rock his body from side to side. I'm a no good failure, he muttered. Get ready, Nat, whispered Valdez. Start moving in on him. Jose continued muttering to himself, with his head lowered. Sometimes what he said made sense. Sometimes it was just a confused string of words. I crept along the roof towards him. I'm a no good fail. As Jose's voice trailed off into silence, the sideways rocking motion continued. With each swing, the top part of his body hung for a moment over the vertical drop. Then the return swing. Behind me, Valdez shouted urgently, This is it! Now! Jose had reached the furthest point of the swing. But this time, he didn't return. He was slipping off the edge. I made a dive for his foot, and just managed to grab it. Jose was now hanging upside down over the edge. I was also hanging over the edge, with only my knees pressed against the wall, preventing me from following Jose. Stella and Valdez were already hanging on to me, but in that position, no one else could reach Jose from the roof. Jose was not light, and I could feel my grip slipping. Valdez was screaming to the firefighters below. Move it! Get that ladder up here before we have a fatality! I concentrated all my efforts on keeping my arm locked around his foot. Jose swung in space over the drop. I could feel my muscles aching and weakening. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the ladder swinging around. At the top of the ladder, there was a firefighter who took Jose's unconscious body into his powerful arms and swung him over his shoulder. As Jose was brought down to safety, a medical team on the ground was waiting to take him straight to the operating room. I pushed myself back from the edge and collapsed behind the safety of the wall. I opened my eyes to see Stella kneeling beside me. Nat, are you okay? She asked. You were wonderful. Thanks. I'm all right. Just let me lie here. I don't want to see that drop again just yet. I lay there for a while, thinking it was good to be alive after all. I'd had quite enough excitement for one day. Nat, you're a hero, said Valdez. Well, if I'm a hero, so are you. You read all the signs that he was going to jump. Anyway, let's get down to the operating room and see what's happening. We were informed that Dr. Erickson was already operating on Jose. The brain surgery was a delicate procedure which would take hours. There was also a high element of risk. Jose had already put himself in danger by escaping from the operating room. The added stress could only have done further damage. Stella decided to stay at the hospital and wait for news. As I left, she was calling her mother. A better option for me was home, food, beer, TV, and relaxation. Chapter 6. The Odessa Steps. Monday morning, back at the office on East 43rd Street. I was going to be all alone. Stella had stayed overnight at Metropolitan Hospital. Her brother had come out of surgery, but was still unconscious. It was still too early to tell whether the surgery had been a success. I was now convinced that someone wanted a convenient fall guy to take the blame for Romanov's murder. Maybe Jose had simply been unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Just a harmless guy enjoying an evening out with his buddies. Now he was facing a murder charge. The problem was our total lack of evidence. The whole thing made me angry, but I couldn't allow that anger to affect my judgment. Meanwhile, I'd done a little research on the cross that Edie Tilden had seen on the body on Jones Beach. It was definitely Russian, the design used in the Russian Orthodox Church. It was likely that the letters on the lifeboat were also Russian. I now had photographs of Jose, Miguel, and Carlos. I'd phoned all the bars in the area, and had finally discovered one run by a baseball enthusiast, the Odessa Steps. I decided it was time to take a trip to Brighton Beach and follow the movements of the three friends on Wednesday night. There was a small chance I'd pick up a few pieces of evidence. As I was getting ready to leave, I had a surprise phone call. Edie Tilden, the elderly woman I'd met at Jones Beach. "Mr. Marley? Edie Tilden, remember me?" she asked. "It's kind of hard to forget you," I replied. "You're not going to believe this, but I found 2 more bodies on the beach. Cold and stiff they were." I gripped the phone tightly. "Now don't get overexcited. Just describe what you saw. Don't dramatize." "Well, it was early this morning. I was out to see what the morning high tide had washed up along the shore. And then I found them. 2 more young men, about 500 yards east from where the boat was wrecked," said Edie. Edie went on to describe them. The 2 young men could have been anywhere in their 20s. Like the other 2 bodies, they were very thin. They were wearing cheap, casual clothes, jeans, denim jackets, T-shirts, and running shoes. Clothes worn by young men everywhere. Nothing specific to go on here. "Did you notice any jewelry or identifying marks? Like scars?" I asked. "No, nothing like that," she said. "Thanks, Edie. That's good work. You should have been a detective. Keep on with the beachcombing. Call me any time you see something suspicious, will you?" I was very curious. A murder in Coney Island, and now 4 bodies washed up on Jones Beach. Romanov was a respected member of the Russian community, and it looked like the 4 dead men found on Jones Beach were also Russian. Was there a connection? I was wondering how those boys had died. Drowned accidentally in a storm, or what? I called the Coast Guard press officer, who had prepared a news release. He promised to email it to me immediately. As I put the phone down, the email came through. U.S. Coast Guard Group, Mauritius. Press release. Incident at Jones Beach, Long Island. The Coast Guard Service is currently investigating the wreck of a lifeboat discovered on Jones Beach, and also the discovery of 4 bodies nearby. The victims are white, male, and aged between 20 and 30. The wreck is being investigated as suspicious for the following reasons. No boats have been reported missing. No person has been reported missing at sea. The boat was not in seaworthy condition. No registration details are available for the boat. If you have any information that would be of assistance to the U.S. Coast Guard, please contact Commander J. Lockhart, U.S. Coast Guard Station, Mauritius, Long Island, New York. I printed out the email and put it aside to read again later. It was time to go to Brighton Beach and pay a visit to the bar where Jose had fallen asleep. I took an express Q train from the 42nd Street subway station. As the train made its way through the suburbs of Brooklyn, I glanced through the daily news. Nothing more on the Romanov story. I got out at the Brighton Beach subway station and started working my way along the avenue, inquiring at bars whether Jose and his buddies might have been drinking there. It was just before noon, so the bars were still quiet. A couple of bartenders vaguely recognized the photographs, but couldn't provide me with anything useful. I finally arrived at the Odessa steps. Inside, the walls were covered with baseball souvenirs. Picture after picture of the famous Brooklyn Dodgers teams who dominated the American baseball scene in the 1940s and 50s. I ordered a beer and sat down to take in the atmosphere. The lunchtime crowd was arriving, and the bar was becoming noisy with Russian conversation. At the next table, one of the staff had a collection of tools on the table, and also a beautiful antique baseball bat. He was preparing to put it on the wall. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm interested in the bat. I bet it has a history. Something new for the baseball exhibition, huh?" "This bat, mister, was used in the final game of the 1955 World Series," proudly replied the bartender. "When the Brooklyn Dodgers beat the New York Yankees. It's my boss's favorite piece. He paid a fortune for it." "At today's prices, I'm sure he did," I said. "Well, that was back in the 1980s, so it isn't a new piece. We've had it up here in the bar for years. You're not going to believe this, but Wednesday night last week, some joker pulled it off the wall." "No kidding. Whoever it was would have been lucky to get out of here alive," I commented. "I guess so," he said. I showed him my investigator's license. and also the photos of Jose and his buddies. "Did you happen to see these three guys in here on Wednesday?" I asked. He immediately pointed at Jose's picture.
"Hey, that's the guy who grabbed the bat."
"What time was this?"
"Had to be 9 o'clock. I remember because it was just before my break,"
the bartender replied. "What happened to this guy after he tried to take the bat?" So far, the bartender had been talkative. Now he looked nervous and started to hesitate.
I must have been on my break. Look, why don't you ask my colleague behind the bar? You remember?"
The conversation with the other bartender followed the same pattern. His memory was perfectly clear, up to the point when Jose took the bat. Mysteriously, they both suffered from total memory loss after that. Were they hiding something? Or were they scared of something? I was certain about one thing. If a stranger walked into this bar and attempted to steal one of their sports treasures, they'd be lucky to get away unharmed. Was it possible Jose received those throat and head injuries in the bar? I didn't think I was going to find out anything more, but at least I had made some progress. Jose and his buddies had definitely been in the bar. I had a time, 9 p.m., when Jose must have woken up and, in his confused state, made a grab for the bat. But why wouldn't the bartenders reveal anything more? I stayed at the bar and ordered a roast beef sandwich and fries. While I was waiting for the food, I made a call to Stella at Metropolitan Hospital. Jose was still in intensive care, slipping into a coma, a state of deep unconsciousness.
"Nat,"
said Stella,
"my mom's going to take over for me at the hospital. I'll be going home soon to get some sleep. I'm just exhausted. But I'll be at the office first thing tomorrow."
"You know you don't have to if you want to keep your mom company," I said.
"Nat, I'm depending on you to clear Jose's name and prove his innocence. Let's get on with this investigation. I'm going to be right there with you."